everyone, I'm Dr. Ellie and I'm here with my podcast, I Heal Kids. And if you don't know me, I'm a holistic pediatrician in Asheville, North Carolina. And I take care of kiddos 0 to 21 for all holistic pediatric needs. And I also do functional medicine for ages 2 to 102. So if you have any functional medicine needs, then reach out to me as well. And if you don't know what functional medicine is, I have done plenty of pods on that. So I will link those in the show notes. Today, I am so excited because I am talking with the very busy and very amazing Mary Kate Bashaw today. And she is the executive director of Homegrown Families. So welcome, Mary Kate. Thanks for coming. Well, I'm just going to read a little bit about her and tell you that she is in charge of engaging new and growing families at Homegrown by being a source of informational and emotional support, as well as connecting folks to get birth and postpartum support if they need it. Mary Kate's an intuitive powerhouse that loves to help parents thrive in their parenting journey instead of just simply surviving it, which is amazing. She understands the power of creating a nourishing community so that parents have confidence and support they deserve. Mary Kate is a DONA International certified birth and postpartum doula that specializes in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. She was trained through the Postpartum Support International as a perinatal mental health professional in order to support parents in finding their inner strength with trauma-informed coping techniques, which is super good. She has also studied to become a Lamaze childbirth educator, lactation educator, holistic infant sleep educator, as well as an expert in sibling and animal integration. I mean, you could not be more qualified. That's amazing. Yes. She has served several hundred clients and families in and around Western North Carolina with this massive skill set that doesn't get any bigger, that allows parents to make informed decisions when it comes to their intentions for birth and their postpartum journey. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. I usually just tell people, as a shorter one, of I'm just the coolest person you'll ever meet. So we don't have to spend 6 hours of okay, all the qualifications.
Maybe we can just call you Mary Kate the baby and mom and parent and family whisperer. I don't know. So I was just kind of hoping we could just dive right in. Do you mind sharing your professional journey and what inspired you to get involved in this field? Because I understand you worked with Homegrown Families for 4 years, but you also ran your own doula company, and then you merged the two. So what was the story with all of that and the transition?
Yeah, so I was 25 and had pregnant with my first kid, and we came to Homegrown to take their classes. And actually, one of my friends in college had just done the Homegrown doula training here, and I say here because I'm in the office.
Yes. And you can see it if you're on YouTube.
Right. And so I was her first birth. And after my birth, I was just oh my God, I don't know anything. And I have a degree in education and child development and psychology, and was a nanny and teacher for years. And I felt so unprepared for life in postpartum. And so I had reached out to Kama, the original owner of Homegrown Families, and started my training with her, and then immediately kind of mentored under her and Jen Chanley, who was a previous owner of Homegrown Families too. And they just were amazing in supporting me as a new mother who had limited resources and, couldn't afford postpartum doulas and didn't have any family support. I was lucky my husband's family would come and visit us for these chunks of time, but they live all out of state, across the country.
So hard.
Yeah. Hard. And we didn't have any childcare because it's impossible, and another mortgage payment. And so I definitely found my community here around, of other parents. And then kind of blossomed as a doula. Then all of my friends started having babies, and I became their birth doula. And I just kind of love the combination of kind of seeing this full wraparound of meeting people in their pregnancy, supporting their birth, and then also following up postpartum.
Yeah.
And so I was just a little sponge for a few years of I want to know all the things, because someone who had studied a lot, I felt like I still didn't know. There was still so much to know. And that's a lot of pressure on parents who find out they're pregnant and now they have like 9 to 10 months to suddenly learn all this stuff that we as professionals take years to learn and understand.
Yes. I mean, I think that's amazing. And I love where you talk about like the wraparound where it's like prenatal, birth, postpartum, because I do think as a pediatrician, I mean, I'm not as involved in the prenatal, but from the postpartum side, it is a whirlwind. I mean, there you can do a lot of prep and you know, from what I see and have observed over my 17 years of practice, that first month is just like, whoa, like what's happening with feeding and sleeping and baby. And, you know, so much support is needed. And to your point, it is so hard to find that support in our current state of
Yeah.
society. I have been, if anyone can help with this, let me know because I have been rolling around a pet project for a while in my brain and have it, you know, sort of noodling on it. But I would love to create like some kind of grandparenting connection, like
Yeah.
whether in person or app with healthy seniors and families that have young children so that there is support for people in our community and maybe expand it out. But I haven't yet had the bandwidth and I need like a team of
Yeah.
people
No,
to
for
help me with that
sure.
project.
Yeah,
Yes.
when we had our stroller revolution, it was like a weekly walk. We would have like grandparents come. A lot of times it was like the stay-at-home parent, usually the like postpartum person and their baby come. But then it was really sweet when the grandparents and partners also came to it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we were always going to French Broad River Park. And so for those not in the area, that was significant. Like the whole park was damaged and it was kind of the perfect central park. And so I'm still trying to find another location that would be good for a weekly walk that meets all of the needs of, you know, parents can be able to be late and still jump right in, and also a bathroom close by and good parking.
Yes.
I think we're
Yes.
getting there as things are starting, more parks are opening up again. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, I mean, it has been a struggle. I've had a few parents go to the Biltmore, but sometimes not everyone has the resources for that. So
Yeah.
it can be really hard. And I do hope you know, our community is rebuilding, but oh my goodness, it has been and continues to be a massive project for those of you who aren't in the community with
Yeah.
the damage from Hurricane Helene. Well, I do hope we are able to, you know, maybe with all of our, all the people that we know, all the doulas and all the pediatricians, maybe there's a way to start connecting healthy seniors with other families as well, and not
Mhm.
just their own, what's the word I'm looking for? Not offspring because it's not their actual child, but
Right.
their own lineage,
Mhm.
for like a throwback to 1920 or
Right.
something.
Yeah. No, and I think that is like a really helpful need because a lot of us don't live close to our families, or they live close by, but maybe they're not like healthy or safe relationship dynamics to have.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yep.
I was going to say that I forgot to finish the question of how I became a doula and homegrown, like how I became an owner.
Oh, yeah, tell me. Yeah, we'd love to know. We want to know.
And so after I'd been a doula for a few years, I'd been a part of Homegrown, then came was ready to kind of retire from this side of teaching and running a doula agency. And I had been a part of the admin for a few years at that point. And instead of closing, I bought the company to kind of continue the legacy. And so that's when I kind of merged my own personal doula company in with Homegrown Family. So it was like kind of one whole to kind of keep that support, because it's always been, for me as someone who is really under resourced, um, to have a place that, obviously, like, we have to make money and there's a lot of for profit places in town, but there is a huge population that can afford these services and see it as like doula care or classes and education are like luxuries, and a privilege. And I never want price to be like a deterrent for people. And also, people can feel awkward about naming that. And we've had a lot of job loss again with the hurricane too. And so people also, you know, I think when it comes to money, sometimes it's hard for people to say like, "Hey, I can't afford this," and it's easier to just be like, "Nope, I'm not going to do it." And I found that because we kind of name that and offer it, it makes it a little bit easier to have that conversation of like, you deserve these regardless of price. We want to do what we can to like support you. Uh, so yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that so much. I think I struggle with that in my own business at times because I am a membership practice. I'm a direct primary care practice, and I structured it that way because I want to have the time to spend with my patients. And insurance models, A, they don't really
Yeah.
reimburse for holistic care at all,
Right.
and B, it forces me into a model where I have to push people in and out the door. So I ended up just coming up with a structure where I place, a certain amount of the profit as I can, because each month has been different with the hurricane, into a savings. And then when it reaches like a certain threshold, then I can start scholarshiping people in. So I've created like a little wait list for it. And, maybe there'll be a better solution down the line, but that's kind of where I've landed right now. But it is so important to consider, we do need to support everyone because we've all been there. We've all been in situations where, we couldn't afford and we couldn't do and all of this. And we need to support each other as a community. I mean, I remember being a medical student, and this was back when there was really no option. If you didn't have healthcare insurance through something like a job,
Yeah.
you didn't have health insurance.
Mhm.
And I had a really horrible pneumonia, and I was so sick and I couldn't access care at all. And I actually was having another medical student call her dad in a different state for assistance because I was just laid up in bed. So I think, we all end up in situations where we just don't expect, and it is so important to support, as we can.
Yeah, and that's
So
what it's been beautiful to see our community care model work is also with a lot of things that are going on, just not in our town, but even in our whole country too, of like we're seeing a lot of these issues and people are like, I do have money and I wanted to be supportive. How can I show up? Maybe they're like, I can't attend a protest, but I can maybe pay a little bit extra for these services in order for someone who can't afford to. And I think that also gives a really great opportunity for other people to show up when they might not know how to get involved or know how to, how they want to show up and make a difference. Because especially if you're like, I see all this stuff on social media, but it's like re-sharing memes isn't enough, we want
yes,
more. And I think part for, we've been talking, I think because we just started talking about the hurricane, it's just like on my mind, but it was like because
yeah,
of that event, all of our community came together. Yes, we had a lot of outside help too, but that first few days and week, it was kind of, we were all on our own in our own little neighborhoods. And we were like, I don't care if we have different opinions on these things. We were like, what can we do for each other? It's just like that back to basics. That's kind of similar how I feel like our profit and or similar to how things work out in order to offer these services.
yeah. Yeah, it was amazing to see that. I mean, we were on the street having, barbecues with all our neighbors and, people that we hadn't noticed, we really hadn't noticed them because we had just moved into the neighborhood and we were just getting settled. And, and now we're like, oh, you live right, you live next door. Maybe we should have a
Right.
conversation. And it's so crazy to even think that wasn't a thing. And isolation is such a problem. Isolation is it's an actual cause
Yeah.
of illness and disease. I love that idea about the pay it forward. Maybe I can start implementing that in my own practice. That's a great idea. If there are people with resources that do feel like they want to donate for a family who
Yeah.
can't afford, I'll have to work on that. I'll keep you guys posted, but I think that's a great idea. So how do you define like the mission of Homegrown? You've kind of touched on this, but just to get like a very succinct statement, like how do you define the mission and what impact do you see it having on new and growing families?
I would say our main mission definitely would come down to how can we create more social justice, and doula work in itself is such a grassroots, like boots on the ground call to action to like directly help our local community. And we also see how that also helps others and other places, people. I still see it in shows where doulas and midwives are like blurred as like the same thing. They're very different. We don't do anything medical, but and so it's like more people are familiar with doulas um in the care that we offer, But I would say like our main mission is kind of creating this equity community, like where all of the there's access to information is equal. You know, we are in the South, and so we also know a lot of these statistics about the Black maternal mortality rate. And it is one thing to know, like, oh, these are the stats, but it's definitely different when you actually see it in person. And that was something I learned about, like, kind of firsthand, and was trained by these wonderful Black doulas that really helped me understand how to show up, especially as a white person in those spaces, and what's like actually beneficial, and what my role can be. So I would say that was a very long-winded answer. But so I would say like our main mission really is to be like a lifeline for our community. Each parent is coming with different morals and values and different backgrounds on what's important to them. Is this their first pregnancy? Have they experienced loss? You know, maybe they've had kids before and they want to have a different storyline. So, you know, studies have shown that support and education, that continuous care, improves birth outcomes. It improves satisfaction with your story, regardless of the outcome, regardless if you needed a cesarean or you had interventions for your birth. And so, especially when we think of that isolation, we're kind of expected in our society of like self-reliance. It's only two people, and it's just
Yeah.
impossible to
It's
like
impossible.
work.
It is impossible.
Yeah,
Yes, I'm here to tell you, please seek help if you can. Like if there's any way you possibly can. Yes.
for sure. And so, because I hear it all the time of like, I'm trying to find this like work-life balance, and it's not, you know, I like to think in metaphors, um, of like, we're looking at like these scales of like, I'm trying to do this balance, but it's not a scale. It's actually, I like to see it as a pie chart. And like each week or each day, different parts of that pie are bigger. Like maybe this day was a lot more work and maybe a little less time for my kids. But then the next day I was way more present and had more space for my kids. Like that to me is what balance is that it's this ever changing kind of target and percentages, versus like I'm trying to get this, because I'm never going to be able to have like this amount of space for
Yeah.
work and this amount of space for like my kids or for hanging out with friends and hanging out with my dogs or just doing hobbies. It doesn't, there's too many categories. It's impossible. And we, especially just if you're in a two-person household, it's hard to do things. And then if you're in a single parent household, it's like even harder to get your own needs met while making sure this other person has their needs met. You just can't do it all. And I feel like that's where like 90s feminism, I would say like 90s white woman feminism failed us, of like super mom, you know, it's
Huh?
like that's not what we were going for. Like we want to be equal, but we didn't want to like do all the things, you know. So
I'm thinking about, I'll link it in the show notes, but I'm thinking about this pod I listened today that was like, do you have like a tiny manager living in your head or a tiny
but yes.
entrepreneur living in your head? And I was like, I do. I have a tiny, and I was like, good, I got to get that out. You know, this person that's like, you know, who is this person that's saying you've got to make sure that all the laundry's done, the house is swept, you know, the medical practice is running perfectly, the website's beautiful, and I have great skin. I mean, come on now, you know, and, you know, trying to get in the workout and eat all the nutritious foods. And the truth is, it's everything in life. The best we're ever going to get is 80-20. And that's what I always tell people too. I like the idea of like the fluid motion with it, because really, I mean, even as an integrative doctor where my nutrition is very dialed in, of course there's days, of course there are, where I'm like, all I can manage is a frozen pizza. And, you know, that was part of my 80-20. And that's what I always tell people is it's like, you do the best you can in the time that you have with the capacity you have in the moment. Yeah, I'm on board with that. I wanted to jump into like all of your education because you have done, I mean, so much. I'm like, how did you even pack all of that in? It's like, you're a doula, you're a lactation person, you're an educator, you do mental health stuff, you're trauma informed, you're running a business. I'm like, how many roles
Okay.
do you have?
So
Yeah.
I'll say like I've always been this type of person. Like I was a super senior because I also couldn't pick a major, and that's why I had so many
Okay.
minors and majors. So it's part of my personality to do lots and lots of things.
Okay. So you're
I
multi-passionate.
am.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll just say like it's in my bones. But I would say like starting out, I'll say it is really hard to start out as a doula in the beginning, because you don't totally, you're like, I don't know all these things yet. I don't know what like my style is. You haven't seen, this big array of the spectrum of normal and birth is so big. And then there's also this things like of not normal. It was only my second birth. I had a medical emergency transfer.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it was a lot, but it also I think at that point I was like, maybe I'll be a midwife. And at that point, from that experience, it made me be like, no, this is why I need to be a doula, because the way that I was able to like show up and fill in the cracks. I won't go into the detail because I always want to respect other people
Privacy.
that may
Yes.
be listening in, but it was like I was able to do things that the providers weren't, and felt like I was kind of, and it's not the providers were doing exactly what they needed to do, but I was able to be there to help explain what was going on, to tell the parents kind of what to do, and to just also hold space for them. And I was like, I remember I actually came after this birth being like, this is why the world needs doulas, and it was like, but as someone, I
Yes.
also didn't understand some of the things that were happening.
Right.
Now I actually do work a lot with high risk pregnancies now, which is just something that's just kind of happened over the years. But it takes a lot of gaining experience and learning all of these things. And, it was kind of also a perfect job for me of like I could be a stay at home mom and then work a few times a month essentially,
Yeah.
kind of. And I've been lucky, and my husband is a substance abuse counselor, and so his jobs have also been really supportive of if he had to like leave for me to go to a birth or take care of my kid, and that's been really helpful to have a supportive partner. I think it wouldn't have been as successful without that. He's amazing, love him, clearly keep him around.
Ah,
My first
yes.
husband, he doesn't like that joke. But
He's like, what are you talking about, Mary
yeah,
Kate? Like,
I was
what?
like, you might be the only one, but you're still the first.
You're still the person. He's like, hey. Well,
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say like it took a few years. I think it took some experience. I didn't know I wanted to be a childbirth educator first. It's just interesting to see how, I guess, look back and see how it evolved over the years. And we're finally getting more research too in reproductive health, which is amazing. So it's something that I find really important to stay up to date on. I'm a very like middle grounded person of like I love evidence-based information. However, we do have limited funds for research. Some people are like, I'm not going to fund that research, or there's some research, but it's inconclusive, or maybe it was like a small and it was only like about like white people. And so it's like there's still limits and things that we know. And so I think I've always been a learner, and I was a teacher for a few years. So it just kind of I feel like
it
flowed
evolved.
naturally. And so I
Yeah.
love teaching. It's so much fun. And it's been nice. And I think with learning a lot, making my own curriculum that is inclusive to every birth location, to every parent dynamic too, like not just cis het, white couples, but like really opening up the space for people. So, because people come in with very specific questions, and it's helpful to be able to address them. Sometimes it's not always the thing with birth is it's not always a black and white answer, and I think
Right.
that's what's really hard because birth is unpredictable and postpartum is unpredictable. And so in some ways of like you don't know what's going to come up for you, so it's like we try to prepare parents as best we can.
I'm fascinated by all of that. Yes, like research is challenging, especially in the holistic space, because
Uh-huh.
to your point, sometimes it's hard to create research studies. So for
Yeah.
example, yeah, like in my world, like herbs, a
Uh-huh.
lot of times you would never give like one single herb or herb extract. You're actually doing like a combination of things at once.
Right.
like, for example, an herb and a lifestyle and an exercise and a food plan and all of this. And how do you create a study to extract, from that what is and isn't helpful? And I love that you're in the middle of the road because, middle path, that's where
Yeah,
I live
right.
too. I work at that
I did that
intersection of,
unintentionally.
yes, I know, I wasn't planned at all, but that's what I do. I'm at the intersection of conventional and holistic. So it was like so good. It was so good.
I feel like we need that, of like being neutral and objective, of like having a person that can look at kind of like all sides of options for people. It opens up of like, yeah, there's all these alternatives you can do. And even it's like, as much as I love to be like, this is evidence-based information, there's lots of times where I'm being like, I'll name it, it'll be like, this is anecdotal, or like explain, like, no one's studying placenta consumption, even though it's something that we know from like ancient times, other cultures, that is commonly done. But one, you can't really have a control group for that.
Right.
And also no one's funding it. And
Yeah.
there's, it's hard when there's all these factors, especially when you think of herbalism, like what are people on any other medication? What's their medical history? It's so like that practice in itself is so individualized.
Their genetic
And
health,
so
all of
that's
that.
why it's hard when we have limited resources and people are like, well, what does the research say? And I was like, there isn't any. And I wish there was. We have like self-reporting research, but
Yeah.
sometimes we're limited.
Yeah. This is kind of like when I get questions around herbs for newborns.
Uh,
There's just not that many people that are like, cool, let's just feed my newborn a bunch of herbs and see what happens. That's why it's really hard to get those scientific answers. But I mean,
right,
we can see what's happened, traditionally, like with things like chamomile that people have used for hundreds of
right.
years. But yeah, you had pointed to like people coming in with like very specific questions. I'm just curious, does anything come to mind that people have just kind of asked you that you're like people just asked me this, and maybe our audience just kind of wants to know your answer.
Like
But if
something
not,
people ask me all the time.
yeah, yeah, if not, don't worry. But I was just curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like, yeah, I don't know if I guess maybe probably like, when am I going to sleep again?
Okay, that's true. Yes, that's what people ask me. Yes, when am I going to sleep again? When am I going to feel normal
Right,
again?
exactly.
Is this forever? Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
many of those questions.
So
Yeah.
I'd say that's like the most common. And then also the answer for that is also it's going to be dependent on what the family's goals are. Like, do they want to sleep in a family bed where everyone's together? Do they need to sleep in separate rooms? Or also, again, knowing what works for them and what works for other people.
Yes.
It's kind of
Not
like,
always the same.
yeah. And even like temperaments, like my first kid was like, really, we struggled so much with sleep. And honestly, that is why I did the sleep like training. It was
You
really
did
focused
because of
reasons.
that.
I was like, how can I
Okay.
get my kid to sleep? Like that was
Yes.
purely for me.
Yes.
I mean, I
You're
hope
like,
I
I need
deal with
help.
it now, but I was like, and because also even with sleep, when I was trying to look up stuff and get support from others, it was a lot of times it felt like there was only one option. And like,
Right.
that's never, like I said, like I like being kind of in the middle. There's always choices, there's always options. There's really not a one size fits all, because, and so it took me a while to actually find a training. It was actually in, based out of Australia. And I'm glad I was able to do it like remotely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, did you fly? Because
I would have
that's really
loved to go to,
cool.
oh, that would have been, I mean, this was during COVID, so definitely not. Australia,
Okay. Yeah.
was not letting anyone in. That would have been amazing. I would love, one day I'll make it there.
One
But it
day.
was really inclusive and talked about the kids' temperament. What's best for the parents? What are they eating? How is their meals going? How much sunlight are they getting? And what is the sleep environment? And less of like, even like sleep training. I don't really even like that term, or the
Hmm.
like self-soothing, because kids can't actually self-soothe until they're 3 years old. And that makes people really sad to hear that. But what they needed, like they're young, they need support. And that support can look in various ways. Sometimes it does look like leaving the room, one, maybe just to regulate yourself, and get some space, or your kid needs no stimulation and needs to be left alone in order to calm down, or maybe they need to be like held or humming to, and Yeah, no, looking at all of the sensory needs of
Sense.
a baby. And so really when I think of talking to people about sleep, it's like, well, what sleep environment will everyone in the family unit thrive? Because sometimes people just focus on the baby.
Yes.
And I just always tell parents of like, your quality of life matters too, or your
Yeah.
quality of life.
I have to say, the number of dads who are like, I love my baby, I love my wife, and I'm talking about in the hetero cisgendered situation. So sorry for the exclusionary language here, but truly, the number of dads who are like, I cannot have baby in the bed anymore. Like I can't. I mean, just because of the just exhaustion factor and the way our society is set up, where oftentimes dads are back at work and all this, and moms are exhausted too. I don't want to downplay that too, but it has been interesting to see like the exclusion of the family unit from this discussion. And I'm like, no, like we're all involved, like everybody's here, everyone's in the house, like we do need to support all members of the family. What did you learn? What did you learn specifically about baby sleep? Is there any like, I mean, obviously we cannot reduce this topic to like the 5 minutes that we have. Do you have like any top 3 tips? And maybe we'll just bring you back on and do, if you're up for it, like do a whole sleep episode.
Yeah, I think my top tips are a lot of times people want like routine. And until a baby is 3 months, they can't be on like a clock or like a timed routine. But what they can have is an order of events. And so the baby can understand this is when this happens, when I get a diaper change, then I get to play with, on the floor mat or do Tommy time. And then we go and walk the dog. And then I come home and I get to nurse and then I fall asleep. And then I wake up and do that again. Or then maybe we're going to the grocery store, like whatever the routine is, it doesn't matter. But if someone's wanting, they're like, I need structure, I need something, if you can detach from the actual clock, like the time, and just focus on this is the order I'm going to do things. Because as parents, we have to be flexible. I say it all the time how parenting, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, it's like flexibility boot camp for, I call them growing opportunities, whether you want them or not. I used to think I was super chill
Uh-huh.
when I went into labor, and then I was like, oh, I'm not flexible. And my husband was like, is this new information for you? It is to me. I thought it was so chill,
Yeah.
but I like to be in control. And there's so many times as a parent, you're kind of out of control. And so I think when it comes to sleep, what can you control? You can control the order you do things, the sleep environment of where is my baby sleeping? Do they sleep better with like contact naps, or when they're next to someone? Do they sleep better when they're in their own like side bed? Do they sleep better by the window? Like, what's the lighting like? Or certain sounds, like maybe they hate white noise, but they really love the like rainforest water rain sounds. So I
Yeah.
do think there's a lot. There's not this like one size fits all, but I think as a starting point, kind of routine and staying consistent, because it's also probably not going to work out immediately. Sometimes people come and they're like, I tried this day one. I'm like, it may be a few weeks, but if you
Yes.
keep doing the same thing over and over again, that stability and that consistency, that's when you're going to see the results. Even if it
Mm-hmm.
sucks and you're miserable for a few weeks, I'll be like,
Mm-hmm.
future you is going to be so grateful you did this, even
I
though,
like that. I'm going to start saying future you, because this reminds me of like with talking about, I mean, there's so many topics that are like this, right? Because, as an adult, like I'm thinking about potty training, like as an adult, it's like, yeah, of course, like you just, you sit down on the potty and then you go and that's it. And then you flush and then it's done. Like, simple, simple. And then it's like, oh no, there's actually like how many steps to potty training, like all the way from what is a potty?
right?
First
Yeah.
of all, because that, I've had kiddos that are terrified of potties. They're like, the dragon's going to come up and bite my booty. Like I have heard it all. Yes. And then I'm thinking about like feeding. Like I just talked with Stephen Kempler at Whole Family. There's 32 steps to feeding. It's not one step. And I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, like really, I think as parents, as educators, as doctors, it's like just that knowing of this is supposed to take some time, and that's okay. When it comes to sleep, when it comes to, anything, potty training, mental health, like in the older teens, I'm thinking about, like, if we have a situation where we have to go to therapy, it's not one, it's not one
Right.
session. I wish
Yeah.
it was, but all of that. But yeah, no, that is good information, just making it personalized. And I resonate with that, of course, because that's pretty much where I live, is like personalized health.
Mhm.
How
Yeah.
would you say, like, all your roles have kind of intertwined? Because you've got sleep, you've got lactation, you've got all this. Like, how do they intertwine, to so, like, your role currently and like how you're supporting people currently?
I think, we've talked a lot about like the individual. Why can't I say individual? We've talked a lot about we've talked a lot about how different people have different needs and how can we personalize it for each person, each family. And so I think with having a lot of education, a lot of experience and knowledge, really being able to kind of shift through, kind of like almost being like a Google rabbit hole filter for people in a way of like, we
Yes.
know these things, but how is it actually relevant to you, your family, your pregnancy? Is that going to make a difference? Is it not? And so I think it's helpful because I can show up differently for each family because they're all going to have different needs and different priorities,
Goals.
different goals. Yeah. What are their
Yeah.
different goals for care? So I think being able to serve like a diverse population. And then I do think, like, even like, I don't think I'm the doula for everyone. I don't think I'm the teacher for everyone. But that's what I think is beautiful, is like, I think everyone can benefit from these services and receive them from the person that is. Like, it is such a personal, close, intimate transformation as a parent. Even when you have more kids, it's also another peeling of the onion. I'm not the same parent I was to my first kid as I am now that I have two kids. Um, and so things change, different baby, different birth. And so knowing like who's your perfect match. I always tell people, I'm like, if you hate my voice, like, don't hire me. You're going to hate it more in labor. Like, I'm not.
I never considered that as a consideration, and you have a great voice, by the way. But that is, I
People
guess
always
that's
say that after I say that. They're like, we really like your voice. I just want you to know. And I'm like, I'm fine. Like, I'm an army brat, so I don't really have an accent. It's just certain words. Although when I get excited, I do get really Southern. Like, my mom was from like the deep South, Mississippi. And when she would get
okay.
mad, she would get really Southern because she learned to mask her accent. But then if
Okay.
she was upset, she would get real Southern. And I kind of took the opposite of, when I get excited, I get Southern. So I don't
I
know.
pick up every single accent ever, ever. Like, if I'm talking to someone with a Southern accent, I am so sorry. I am not trying to do this, but I will start talking like you. And I was born in Ireland. So if there's anybody Irish around, I just
Yeah.
immediately flip back in. And then British, my parents are British. So and my husband will be like, who are you? That's not even your voice. And I'm like, it's not intentional. It
I
is
know.
not
It's
intentional
actually
at
really
all.
normal. It's like actually kind of a really cute, like, biological response to like connecting with people, is like talking about them, like that chameleon of like blending in. So that's like totally
Those
normal. That's
Those
how I
mirror
justify it.
neurons.
Yeah.
Yes, those
I went down
mirror
my own rabbit
neurons.
hole with like my accent and words because my husband pointed that out sometimes. It's like I just watched a British show and now I'm saying picking up different words, and yeah,
Hmm.
and the way that you
I
phrase things around different
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I think and just kind of like going back to what you were talking about, like, you're just able, from what I'm hearing, you're able to just kind of draw on all of these pieces, all of these different trainings and all of these different aspects so that you can, personalize and bring to the forefront what each individual family needs, which kind of, that's kind of what I do. And I sort of went down an education rabbit hole too. Pediatrician, functional medicine, integrated medicine. Like, I'm like, what else can I add? When I started to go down the acupuncture rabbit hole, my husband was like, can you please stop getting education? Like, there's other people that can do that. And I was like, yeah, you're right. But I wanted to kind of just move us to like a more kind of maybe more serious topic. And I would just wanted to ask a little bit about kind of trauma informed care, because many of us do have some things and, that can impact the birthing experience, birth, all of that, postpartum, all of the things, chest feeding. How would you integrate, like for someone that has concerns, have had trauma, or maybe they're concerned about trauma, because that can be a thing too, like birth trauma, how do you integrate trauma informed coping techniques into your work with families?
I think a lot of it really needs to happen like before labor and birth. And obviously that's not possible for everyone. And so we meet people like where they're at. But, we talk about all these like breathing techniques that help reduce pain and progress labor. But we also know that a lot of times in our really stressful society, on COVID, like when the pandemic started, it really opened to my eyes that like everyone has trauma. And there's, some people have what we call like big trauma, where these really big, maybe like I like to think of it as like lifetime movie events, and then
Yes.
we call like little traumas of like maybe, it's kind of like a smaller, maybe it was like a, you know,
Like repeated
yeah.
events, those kinds of
Or
things.
just like, small, maybe like someone yelled at you at a grocery store and you just like can't stop, It took me a minute to think of like an appropriate example.
Yeah.
So, I think when it comes to trauma informed care, I mean, I do want to name that for me personally, like my trauma response is actually helping other people and like looking around and seeing what needs to be done without someone having to say that. And so I'll say that like that was my own trauma response for how I grew up, and that's what I needed to do in order to like survive. And it's funny now in that like that actually helps me be really helpful in like a crisis, because I can just ride the waves of the storm. And then I kind of afterwards, that's when I decompress and need to move through it. So I do want to name that like not one, that's not a fun skill set to get. And not
Yes.
everyone has that to be like, I'm good at this because all these bad things happened to me when I was a kid. Yay.
Yeah.
And so, but, I think when it comes to trauma informed care, looking at, we have these different, I totally went off on a tangent. I'm sorry. So I was
You're
talking about,
fine.
so when we think of like breathing techniques, if we're operating in this fight or flight on a daily basis, when we start using those in labor, it may only get someone to a baseline. And in labor, we want someone to kind of go below their baseline of being fully relaxed. And so if they're already operating from so much like anxiety and pain and trauma above what their baseline stability is, those breathing techniques may just get someone to baseline and not be as successful versus someone who's starting at the baseline and then using the breathing techniques to fully relax and open and relax. And then in postpartum, there's so much of like self-care. You need to take self-care. But it's like, how do I do that with a baby? How do I do that while I'm holding a baby, while I don't have any family around? Like, what does that actually look like? Like, what's realistic? So I think, and we do have so much language around, and there's less stigma about going to therapy and acknowledging that, like, people are going to show up in different ways. And so prenatally, I do talk with people of like, what happened? What do you do? What's your like go to when you are in a stressful situation? I do unpack a lot of trauma with families too, things that happen prior to their pregnancy, so that I'm aware of them and I know what works and what doesn't. And then also sometimes if you're in a totally traumatized state, you can't access this logical side of your brain where you're like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I need you to get me water. I need you to stop talking. And so that's where under like allow telling people that kind of up front, acknowledging like, or even afterwards too, of like, yes, that would have been great if you had said that in the moment. However, you didn't have access to those words at that point. You weren't able to advocate for yourself because your brain wasn't working. It couldn't work in that way at that point. And so sometimes I think that understanding can be really helpful, because it's easy to look back and be like, I want to rewrite the story, or looking at the events of this outcome happened and that means this about me. And, I do see that like all the time. And it's like, I got an epidural, I must be weak. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, like that's a storyline.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true. Like, this is all hard work. Um, I've also seen something I see more common is that like the birth person is like rocking it. They're coping so well, they're doing so great. And then usually it's actually the partners are like, that was so traumatic, that was crazy, because they just saw someone like yelling and moaning and screaming the whole time.
Yeah.
And so they might have a harder time with the birth. And so then we look at like what we call secondary trauma, of like when you're a witness or you observe something kind of traumatic happening. And so, I mean, I think it's something that really every person, like any type of healthcare provider or healing provider, should really do a lot more trainings in trauma and coping, of like, what are the warning signs? What does it look like when someone shuts down? Because it can look very different for different people. And I think a lot of times it comes down to language and the power of words. And how do you ask
That is so
questions?
true.
How
That
do
is
you
so true.
phrase that? What are things to say? What are things not to say? Personally, and it bothers everyone else in my life because I bring it up all the time, but when someone's like, I can't imagine, for some reason, that just is a huge pet peeve. I'm like, really? You don't have enough compassion to like use your imagination? Like, I'm sure you've
Yeah.
watched horror movies, you've heard these stories, like you read books,
Like,
like
what do
use
you
your
mean you
imagination.
can't imagine? Just
No,
try. Just try to
exactly.
imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
Like when if someone dies, people are like, oh, I'm sorry. And they're like, it's not your fault. Don't say I'm sorry.
Yes. This is
But
like the
like,
Brene Brown empathy miss
yes,
list.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, I love
Like,
that. I love
miss.
her. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh
she's
my
amazing.
gosh.
She has a lot of really good talks about the language to use. My favorite kind of go-to sentence is, what's happening for you? What's happening
Yes.
in your mind? Taking out any, is that making you sad? Is that like, I'm not, you just objectively, I'm not putting in, it's not a leading question. It's just like, where are you at? What's happened? And so, yeah, I do think language plays a big part, because you also don't know. Because, like, saying I can't imagine isn't a terrible thing to say. I'm not saying that. But
Yeah.
it's like, that's
Yeah.
what bothers me,
Yeah.
and you don't know what someone saying I can't imagine might bother somebody else,
Yeah. Yeah. You have
and
to
so,
ask. You
yeah.
cannot assume. I feel like, yes, because I feel like I still every day am working on this. I grew up with, like I said earlier, British parents,
Mhm.
very blunt, very dry family. And that is just sort of how I was raised and to the point and all of this. And then sort of later in life, I was like, oh, whoa, like this is not, this is not everyone's cup of tea.
Mhm.
Let me tell you. And if y'all aren't familiar with nonviolent communication, it's not what it seems like. I think it needs a rebrand, honestly, because like the whole
Yeah,
it
that's
sounds
not
kind of
really,
like,
I think it
yeah,
makes people interested in reading it, though.
yeah,
But I mean, that is a really, are you talking about the book or just the philosophy?
yeah, both. Yeah. I feel like just that, and I need to study more, but I've done a lot with that. But I think that was helpful for me. Like if anyone's looking for just advice on like how to communicate, I think that's a really helpful
Yes.
one. Dr. Rick Hansen does a lot of work on that too. That's really helpful, especially like for couples. So if you're noticing like, and this never happens to me and my husband, where you've communicated something and you think it's been perfect and you're like, well, why is he mad? Those things can be helpful. And same in relationship with children. And I
Uh-huh.
think that's something people don't often think about is how are we communicating with children? And I think, lately it's coming more into light, like, with respect, meeting emotion, and then we proceed, all of that because they are human.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings me, I just want to ask you, we're a little bit running out of time, but I am just very curious because I don't know. And I wish I knew everything, but as we know, I
We
could
can
live
pretend.
500 lifetimes. Yes, 500 lifetimes and I would not know everything. But what is spinning babies? Spinning, because you're a spinning babies educator. What is that?
Yeah, so I'm working on my certification to be a spinning babies educator, and it is really all focused on what's the position of the baby and how the baby moves during labor, things you can do in your pregnancy to support, kind of like a faster, more comfortable labor. It's called spinning babies because it kind of started. A lot of times people only think of when you have a breech baby and you're trying to flip them. And we
Hmm.
found that like there's different movements and certain sequences you can do in order to help baby rotate to head down. But
Okay.
it's
Okay.
so much more than that too. And so I have found it really helpful of like ways to like regulate the nervous system, ways to where the birthing person can feel more comfortable during labor in their pregnancy, and the way that how do they sleep at night. People talk so much of like postpartum, it's so hard to sleep. And then people are like, I can't sleep in my pregnancy, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how can I sleep and also still use like gravity and movement to keep my baby in an optimum position? So there's a lot of like body awareness, which I will say sometimes with trauma, a lot of us are really detached from our bodies. And
Yes.
so I do like that it really embodies like practical things to help with, yeah, with pain, but also a deeper understanding of like not just what they're feeling in their body, but like what are we seeing? Like how is labor progressing and going? What's feeling good to them? But also like what's the position of the baby? We do sit more, in cars, sitting at desk, so all of that changes while our body's center of gravity is shifting and changing
Mm, mm.
throughout your whole pregnancy. How can we use that to our advantage?
Yeah. Yeah.
And some babies are like, nope, I'm going to be what we'd call like sunny side up, like OP babies, which I had one of those. And they're like, this is the way I'm going to be.
Yep.
It's who I am. But, there are these things we can make more space for the baby to accommodate that space to help with labor as well as someone in their pregnancy too. So, I mean, they have a lot of great resources. They have so many blogs and digital downloads and things like that. But it's been just a really helpful, like practical, because it's during a doula training, you learn all of these movements. But I think when I started to understand like why we do certain movements and also kind of a sequence of an order of doing certain movements and like when to use it, when not to use it, that made a lot more sense to me and understanding, and immediately saw it impact all of the labors following
Yeah.
those
Oh,
trainings.
that's so cool. That is so cool. Okay, now I understand what we mean by spinning.
Spinning
I was
babies.
like,
Yeah,
are
that's
we
where it came from. Yeah,
are
is
we
that we
twirling
spin the
them?
babies.
Like,
Yeah.
what's happening? Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you just one final question and then just where everyone can find you. What would you, I guess, what am I trying to say? Let me back up. If someone were to come to you and say, what is like the most important thing I need to know about homegrown families, or what are like the top 3 or 4 things? Like, what would you say to that?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, just if someone were to come to you like as a new client and they're just kind of like, what do I need to know about homegrown families? Like, what's really important? Like, what would you share just to tell them, like, this is what we do, this is how we can help you?
That we really want to be there for parents like every step of the way, and help people in their pregnancies learn as much as they can in a digestible, evidence-based, also inclusive space, that's also like accessible, getting quality information that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, and also in postpartum, like we're not going to leave you behind. Pregnancy is so celebrated, and then you have a baby, and then people are like, after that first month, they're like, oh, it was cute, bye.
Yeah.
Like I never want that. And so for me, I think the most important thing is like I want to be like, really part of the community of like having those relationships. I'm close to a lot of our perinatal providers in the area, and as friends, as colleagues, and as professionals, of course, but also how can we all come together of like maybe you don't need a specific service from us, but can we point you into the right direction of like this is a really good person to go to,
That's
like trying to find a
amazing.
pediatrician, like just Googling,
Yes.
like, this is who takes my insurance, or this is like, but like, do you like them? Do you guys have the same philosophies? What are some questions to ask those providers, you know?
Yes.
And so really, I like to be kind of just like a staple and a kind of continuous space for people because postpartum's forever. And, I think I have seen that of like having repeat clients, having families come, having, being part of family units of where I was the doula for like every pregnant person in this one family.
Well, that is super
It
cool.
is, yeah, and we get some
Multi-generational.
play, but I think the most I know for me, I think we can make the best impact in changing the narrative and the experiences of healthcare in America is starting just locally. And there's so many different ways to show up. And that's why I have all these ideas. I do all these programs, but I really want it to be this kind of continuous support that's not just going to be like, oh, I can't make money off you anymore. Bye. Like, I mean, that's just not who I am anyway.
Right.
It'd be cool to be a millionaire.
It would be. It would be
I know,
cool.
right? It'd be super nice. Could totally use a new car. Yeah, I think definitely I've always been a very caring person and I have a huge heart and yeah, I don't really the whole like you're not alone is really important to me. And just helping people know that like this is a place you can call. Sometimes we get calls from people out of state and they're like, hey, wanting questions about things or looking for stuff and just being like, okay, yeah. I don't always have resources for other states, but like it's easy I actually do know some places and be like, hey, do you know a good person in this area? I mean, we did do a lot of that for the hurricane when people were changing providers.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a really long answer, but essentially, a safe, continuous care. We're just not going to
And
like
you're not
leave no person
alone.
behind. You
Yes.
know, and so
Yeah. And your services, because you have doula service, you have classes, you have all these things. Like, what are like kind of the top 3 or 4 services people could find at Homegrown?
so we have childbirth classes and birth photography and birth doula services, and overnight postpartum services. We also do placenta encapsulation, whether that's helping with someone consume it or making a beautiful art keepsake with it. So I would say those are like our main focuses.
That's super cool. If anyone has any placenta art, just send it to, and you want to share,
I love it.
I would love to have. I mean, I think it would be super cool to do either digital image. I don't know, but if you have any and you want to DM it to me or whatever the
Yeah.
word is on Instagram, I'm
I'll
totally
send
down
you
to
some
see
of
it.
mine. I love it.
Yes.
It's so pretty. I get to use, the art degree, that I don't really get to use. Or like a
So
little
cool.
placenta print. So
So cool.
yeah.
I love it. So Mary Kate, like how can people, find you? How do they get in touch?
So our main email is info@ashevillehomegrownfamilies.com. We have on Instagram, our is at homegrown_families. So definitely reaching out through email is kind of the fastest way to get a hold of us. But yeah, you can check our website, ashevillehomegrownfamilies.com, or you can email us at info@ashevillehomegrownfamilies.com. So we do have a Facebook group. It's Homegrown Families Community Group. So
Oh, love that. That's cool. I know I wanted to do that for Middle Path, but then I was like, oh, I only have bandwidth for so many things, like between podcasting and YouTubing and Instagramming. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I got the media degree I didn't expect, but that's cool.
Yeah, I will say it like has a life of its own. I think eventually, I think starting it is a lot, but then it's like just other parents able to connect, ask for things,
Yeah,
get other people's experiences
I'll have
where
to do
you
it.
don't have to be as involved.
Okay, everyone, that's all we have today with Mary Kate Bashaw from Homegrown Families. And again, I'm Dr. Ellie from Middle Path Integrated Pediatrics in Asheville, North Carolina. Again, I serve children 0 to 21 for holistic pediatrics, infusing conventional medicine with integrative and functional health. And I also do functional medicine for ages 2 to 102. So if you need any of that, please reach out. Check me out on YouTube, my podcast, Instagram, anywhere you can find people, I'm there. Wishing you guys well. Bye.